Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to this week's episode of the Heroic Mindset Podcast. We are really excited to be back with you today. I've got my co-host, Larry Sunderland, live with me. Hello, Larry. How are you?
Good, Tom. How are you? Really excited to be back here with you again this week.
Yeah, I'm enjoying these conversations and really also enjoying the interaction on our Facebook page that people are engaging with and talking about. I think we're digging into some really deep things that are really valuable to athletes and coaches.
Absolutely. That kind of give and take that we have on the Facebook group is fantastic. I've really enjoyed that and getting to meet some people from all over the world, really, and have these conversations. It's exhilarating, and it gets you thinking, doesn't it?
It is, and I've enjoyed it too. I think we're up to over 20 countries that we have people responding to from the podcast and in the Facebook group. So that is really exciting. So I know we are in a good state of seeing some things loosen up and change. Larry, I was wondering from your angle and with FC Cincinnati and what you're hearing, U.S. soccer, what's going on that's different as some restrictions are easing up?
I think the biggest difference from the last time we spoke is that the MLS, the players are beginning to get back into training. Here in Cincinnati later in the week, they're allowed to do some individual training. It's kind of an interesting situation, right? Because it's 4 players each on a quarter of a field, doing individual work, and there are a bunch of protocols that the players and whatever staff is involved have to follow. So it's very detailed. And I think they're going about it the right way, slowly easing back into things, being very careful about it. But it is an exciting time, right? Because everybody's excited to see things progressing, right? And we're slowly getting back to what the new normal hopefully will be.
Yeah, I think we're a little bit ahead of you. I think Messi and Suarez are already out training today. So that's what changed here. On Saturday, we were able to go out and run during certain hours, and it was hilarious. I expected, for there to be a handful of runners. It was packed. I mean, some of the biggest, these areas that they have here, they're called Ramblas, which you've seen, which are these big areas in the middle of the street. So the traffic goes on the left on one side and on right in the other, and right in the middle is a big green area in a lot of places. And you were trying not to bump into people. I think that the number percentage-wise has gone up 90% of people who started running. So it was really good to see, though. The city's at least getting some life back, and that's really encouraging.
Yeah, I know. My son is funny. He's looking forward to getting back to Barcelona because I know the barber shop just opened up, and he has his barber that he goes to there, and he's dying for a haircut. So he's excited about getting back for that.
Yeah, well, we miss him. Can't wait to have him back. Let me know. I'll pick him up from the airport.
Thank you. That'd be fantastic.
So everybody, we've got a great episode in store for you today. What we want to talk about is this idea of how do you create and sustain a high performance culture? And, this is really a big deal. I think both when you're talking about a team environment, but also the individual environment, the athlete. What kind of a culture is the athlete going to create? How are they going to participate? And this is really a big thing because, Larry, we've all been in cultures that we couldn't stand. I mean, I think probably if you think about the worst culture you've ever been in, you'll have a lot more things to think about than the best culture that you've ever been in. And one of my favorite quotes is by Peter Drucker, who's one of the really respected leadership experts. And he says that culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yep.
And this whole idea of how you integrate a culture really determines a lot about your success. So that's what we're going to dig into today. How do you build culture? What does that look like? What are you supposed to do? And, I thought that we could just start out talking about some of your experiences, Larry, because you've had quite a number as a coach and as a professional athlete. So let's go ahead and start with the thing that most people probably are wondering first, and that is, so of all the environments that you've been in, what is the worst culture? Of course, no, we're not going to ask you to name any names.
No names.
No names, yeah. But what what was the worst culture you've ever been on, and why? What made it such a negative culture?
Well, I think it comes to mind very easily, right? Because I think you mentioned that negative cultures really tend to stand out. And I think there's also an aspect of taking responsibility individually. You mentioned the individual, so I need to take responsibility for my own individual actions within this poor culture that we had. So maybe first I want to talk about my own individual actions, and then we'll talk about what the actual culture was like, right?
Little personal responsibility.
Yeah, and as I reflect back on it, I returned back to a team, and I went back to that team really probably based on my own ego, right? I was going back to that team because I was the veteran going back to the team. I was going to lead this team of young players. I was going to be captain. I was going to have a big role, and I think I built myself up in my own mind that I was going back to be the champion, right? To be the guy. Okay.
And I think that's common, right? Especially for professional athletes or high impact athletes.
Yeah. And it was later in my career, so it wasn't, boy, again, as I think about it right now, I'm going back. Yeah. So it's more money. I'm going to be the man, I'm going to be the face of the team. So it was all about me. I really wanted this. Right. And I probably didn't look at the bigger picture. And when I got back, I was enticed by this ego idea. And then, boy, it was difficult to be the senior player on a very young team because guess what? I couldn't carry the team. And we lost, right? We lost a lot. And as things got worse, then you started to see the culture deteriorate, right? You started to see kind of the blame mentality came in, right? And there was punishment. I mean, I can remember training. Training wasn't training. Training was running. I can remember the players going to training and just, wow, what are we going to do today? And the idea of, we did Cooper tests. I don't know if you remember the old Cooper back then. It was 12, 2 miles in 12 minutes. And it was, I can remember doing 2 Coopers in one training session. It was like, wait, and it was almost, you go into training and you're beginning to dread going to training. Right. And then, and then the idea of new players coming in and threats, right? Guys, if we don't get this win, we're going to be replaced. If you don't have a good game, you're going to be replaced. So now when a new player would come into training, your first thought in your mind is, what position does that player play, right? Because now you're immediately concerned about you. And again, that's negative, right? You're putting yourself above the process and the team. So I think those things all made this an ego-driven climate. And when things don't work, that causes all kinds of problems. And then the culture of the team kind of collapsed based on blame and punishment and threats. And then, a star player is brought in to help turn things around. And that was very short-lived because the star player was all about himself.
More
right?
ego.
So, sorry?
I said just more ego.
It brought more ego in. Yeah, brought more ego in. And there was really no one that kind of gelled the group or unified the group. There was really no culture. It was
no leadership.
No leadership, and then everyone was for themselves, right? Everybody,
right.
Well, listen, I just got to keep my job. So I'm not going to help you. I'm just worried about who's this new player coming in, and it became really a divided group. So for me, that was kind of, I saw that and I took that and, I try to learn from that. And of course I fail often, but I try to learn from that. I try to keep that in my mind.
So I have a ton of questions on this, and I think this is a real interesting one to try and put exactly what's happening in this environment in pro sports with the leadership context that I teach executives in all the time. Because, one of the things that you learn is that the number one driver of human behavior is not what we typically think it is. The number one driver of human behavior is fear. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's tied in biologically because when we were, back in our proverbial caves, we had this fight or flight thing going on, and we had to survive. And the big joke is that if there was a saber-toothed tiger outside of your cave, you better feel fear, because then that puts all the adrenaline and cortisol in your body, so you can either run or you can fight. And the ancestors of ours, we're still sitting here talking, so they made the right decision, right? They ran when they should have run, and they fought when they should have fought. But when you create fear inside of a team or an environment, it changes everything. And I think you said it really, really interestingly, that it became all about me, right? Mm-hmm. So what happens in a fear-based culture is I'm more important than everybody else. So then I start self-protecting. I start, if there's mistakes, like you started saying that there's all of the blame, I don't take responsibility. And then what happens is you create a culture that's based on being a victim, right? And so what a victim is, you're in the victim circle. This is what this is called. The victim circle, whenever you blame other people, circumstances, or things for what's going on, right? So it's the player's fault that pass didn't get to me, or it's the coach's fault for making the wrong decision for the substitution, and then you get a culture of that, which I think is what you're describing. So one of the things I'm interested in, though, is when you came in as this veteran player and it was all about you and your ego, how did the rest of the team respond to you?
Yeah, so I think since the team was so young, initially, when a veteran comes in, there's kind of an automatic respect, right? That's given. And quite frankly, I probably didn't perform well enough to earn that respect. And then I've learned so much. It's not about your playing. It's so much more. It's about the relationships you build off the field. Mm-hmm. And boy, and I'm going to jump back to something you just said a second ago, and I'm going to sum it up. As this was going on, as this season was progressing, I kept thinking, this just isn't fair. It's not fair to me. Mm-hmm. And the victim mentality, when you said that, it was like, wow, it just hit home, because I can remember so often just going, man, this just isn't fair. Wow. I don't deserve this. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. That hit home.
And of course, we're going to talk about a positive culture too. I want to know your best story on that. But I think for everybody that's listening, as a coach or a player, whatever level that you are, this is important, right? Because when you take on this mentality, you start saying this isn't fair, or you start pointing the finger, you are creating a culture, right? That is a culture that's being created. And one of my absolute favorite leadership truths, and something that I say all the time when I'm teaching, whether it's individual or a whole team, is this: behavior that gets rewarded gets repeated. Right? Behavior that gets rewarded gets repeated. And you can apply that to any aspect of life. We do this, if we're trying to set goals in our life, we choose how we're going to reward ourselves. And when we get to the goal achievement, well, then we reward ourselves. When we're raising kids, we do this. You see all the time that moms who tell a kid who's into something they shouldn't be, hey, get out of there right now. And the little boy or girl looks over and then just keeps doing what they're doing. And then the mom gets even louder. Hey, I told you to get out of there. And it's not till the third time that the mom really flies off the handle and has to run over there and get them by the shirt or whatever. And now they know they're really in trouble. So why didn't they respond the first time or the second time? Because behavior gets rewarded, gets repeated. That child knows that the first time mom says, don't do that, it doesn't mean anything. Why? Because she's done it 100 other times before. And so it's established a behavioral pattern. Same thing that we do on teams, right? Is that if you start saying it's not fair and pointing the finger, and you're allowed to get away with that because the culture's so loose, now you're being rewarded for that negative behavior, right? And then you start to see it starts to snowball, because now everybody's kind of in this negative spot because they're all about me, right? Yep. So that's really one of the most interesting things about culture, is that we want to make sure we're building a culture based on behaviors that we want to see. And then that has to be reinforced. So I'm sure you've seen a lot of these things happen, and especially on both sides. So let's jump into the other part of your story. And what's the best team that you've ever been on? I mean, we can sense what this one's like, right? I just can feel it, that it's, it's disappointing, and it's fear-based. So people are wondering about losing their spot and their job and getting traded. And so then they're looking at all these reasons and excuses why things aren't happening, and it just becomes a cesspool. But what happened? Tell us the story of the most positive team, the best culture of a team that you've ever been on, either coaching or when you were playing.
Well, two things come to mind for me. One was as a player, and I'll speak to that one first, and then maybe I'll speak to one as a coach. The one as a player is interesting. I guess it would be an interesting study, because we had the coach of our team at that time was also a player, fantastic player, one of the best players I've ever played with, and a fantastic personality. He had an aura about him, and you wanted to be around him. You wanted to play for him.
Have
right?
the whole package of everything then.
And it was just so natural, right? I don't know if you were to ask him, to do a study on it. I don't know that he could give you the whys. It was just so natural for him, right? He just had this charismatic personality that you wanted to be around. And then on the team, you had a team full of veterans that challenged each other because we cared about each other. We wanted to help one another. And I can tell you the training sessions with this team were some of the best training sessions I've ever been a part of. It was, like I said, the coach of the team was more of a player. So our trainings were pretty much, we got out there, rolled the ball out, and we played. And we would play hard. There would literally be fights in training. But Tom, training ended, and it was, let's all get lunch together, guys. It was this camaraderie that we had. And when we took that onto the field, it was really unique. And I was thinking about it, and I kind of think of it this way. No game ever got away from us. The game may have gotten farther away, but it never got away from us that we couldn't pull it back and get the victory. And we just felt that every match. It didn't matter where we were, what the score was. We knew we could pull that game back at any time.
Right. Well, you discovered something different on that team. I hear you, making this contradiction to the other experience. And somehow this team, it wasn't about me, it was about we, right? Which is one of the first really changes you have to make if you're going to create a healthy culture, is that once you decide that this isn't about me, this is about the person on my right and my left and a team, then you can practice hard and fight hard and, maybe and even have disagreements. I think that's the other thing. People think, well, you just have to have a happy environment where nobody really trains hard or doesn't argue. But that's not what you're talking about at all, is it?
No, not at all. I think this idea of being soft is maybe misinterpreted, right? When you create an environment of safety and of trust, you can really expand and you can really test, because you always go back to that safety. You always go back to that trust, right? And I think this is where we misinterpret things sometimes. And I've done this, right? There's times, hey, I want to be that coach that's hard. I want to push players outside of their quote unquote comfort zone. And sometimes I have to break players down to do that, and that's kind of an old school mentality in a lot of ways. I think when you create this safety, the psychological safety, and this idea of trust within the team, boy, you can really push then, and you can push then without doing harm, because there's always this place to come back to. There's something that's been built on. So I think when you can develop a culture, a climate like that around the team, you can really expand and you can really go outside your comfort zones without the fear of losing players or damaging players.
Yeah, I think you're really hitting on it. And this is the idea, and this is what happens when you shift your mentality from me to we, is all of a sudden you start to create trust, right? And that's really what we're going to dig into today. And I know both from my perspective and Larry's that if you want to have a winning culture, a high performing culture, you have to be laser focused on making sure that trust is one of the most important things that's protected in that environment. We're going to talk about what that is. One of my, there's a research study done out of the book, The Leadership Challenge. And I use this all the time as it relates to trust. And here was the conclusion. Trust-based teams outperform non-trust-based teams by 286%. That is a massive change from and we can all relate to that, I think, because I can remember teams that I was on as a kid where there was no trust. It was miserable. I mean, you didn't want to be, you couldn't wait for practice to be over because the coach is just yelling at you and telling you screwed up and what's the matter with you, and you didn't hit the hole fast enough and all these things. And so then that fear is starting to drive your behavior, and you're more worried about making the mistake than you are about hitting the home run or running the touchdown or scoring the goal. And so you become overly focused on the things that are negative. And that's where, you start getting into self-fulfilling prophecies. I mean, I'm sure, you've got stories of you take a penalty kick. It's like, don't miss the penalty kick. Just don't miss the penalty kick. And then you focus too much on missing, and then you miss it instead of seeing, visualizing where you're going. So I want to dive into this because you and I are having some really good conversations on this whole idea of psychological safety. And, it's not something that you hear a lot about. I'm sure that in your career, probably at the top of the list wasn't a lot of conversations like psychological safety. I mean, trust, yes, I mean, sure, but psychological safety, probably not so much.
Yeah, I mean, I played a while ago, but I don't think the word psychological or psych came up very much at all.
Right. And I'd like to know like how you use this now too, because of course there was a big study that came out by Google, and they're very good with research, analytics. And one of the things that they came up with was this whole idea of how do you build the most high performing team. And I know that any coach that's listening out there or any athlete, they want to be a part of a high performing team, and they want to create an environment where there's a high performing team. And so what Google came up with is there was a number of other things that you need: dependability, structure and clarity, impact, etc. But the number one was psychological safety. And then how they defined that was that team members feel safe to take risks and be vulnerable in front of each other. So this is where these terms start to come from. But I think that one of the truths about safety is that number one, not only do we all need safety, right? I mean, if you think about your relationships, personal relationships, the people that you spend the most time with are the people that you feel the safest with, right? I mean, you're probably not going to spend a lot of time or stay in relationships for very long that you feel are unsafe, where, it's always negative. It's always an argument. There's always a problem. There's always stress. I mean, it's like, that's not what we're going to gravitate towards. We gravitate towards safe environments. But there's a lot of other things that happen when you're in a safe relationship or a safe environment. And the core of that is this whole idea that we're talking about of trust. I think that's kind of one of the main things, right? Is that without safety, there is no trust with your team. You don't get to experience that. You can't fight each other hard on the field and then walk off buddies because there's no trust. Would you agree with that?
I agree 100% with that. And, just to kind of build on this idea of trust, I'll give you an example, Tom. And you mentioned PKs before. We won't mention names, but there was a player who was now a professional player that we had for a number of years. He started in our academy when he was 13 years old, probably. Fantastic talent, right? Undeniable talent. You could project, right? And it's a projection, right? I would never say at 13, 14 years old, I could say this player is going to be a pro. Okay. Mm-hmm. But you could project that he had the talent, that there was potential for him. Okay. So I want to say he was probably 16, 17 years old at the time. And we had a PK to go to the national semifinals. And he took the PK and missed the PK. Okay. Yeah. All right. Unfortunate. Missed the PK. We didn't go to the semifinals.
All the fans on the sideline just,
typical, right? There's a
worst feeling.
Yeah. There's feeling when that happens. There's a little exhale on the bench, and it's like, oh, okay. And look, he missed the PK. There were plenty of opportunities throughout the game for us to win. There were plenty of other mistakes made, and right. So it's never one person, right? So it happens. No big deal. We went into the next season. Another key moment during an international event. Yeah, same player chosen to take the PK. He missed the PK, right? Okay, he missed. Well, in my mind, Tom, I said, what kind of message am I sending this player if I don't trust him to score in a PK now, if I don't give him another chance? This is a player I believe has very high potential, right? And what lesson can I help? How can I teach? How can I make this a teachable moment? So I decided that I was going to stick with this player, right? Regardless of the outcome, I was going to stick with this player because if he ever was going to become a professional, he needed to believe in himself taking a PK. And he also needed to know that the coach and the team trusted him, right?
Now, hold on to that trust thing, Larry, because I think what's interesting is to hear you on the other side making this decision, and then to hear the fans or the parents or whoever's watching the game, what we would all be saying is, why does he keep giving this same guy an opportunity to take the PK who keeps missing? Like, what's going on, right? I mean, but what you're saying is that you're trying to build a culture. You're doing something completely different. It's not just the short term.
Yeah, it wasn't about the immediate outcome. I was looking at not only this player, what he needed for his future, but I was also looking at the message that I was trying to send to the rest of the team.
Very interesting.
And I can tell you, Tom, it was actually kind of funny. Every time a whistle blew in the box and there was a PK taken, my assistant coach would look at me and go, "Not again." And I would go, "Yep." And I don't know whether it was 5 PKs, maybe. It might have taken 5 PKs, but I give this player so much credit because he stepped up every time. And when he finally broke the ice, Tom, do you know what he did? He chipped the keeper.
Oh, really?
And I looked at that and listen, and as a player, I would never try that. I never had the confidence to try that. I don't know whether it was trust or not, but I would never try that. And I looked at this, and this player who over and over and over again, in critical moments, these weren't games that lacked meaning. These were meaningful games. Mm-hmm. In critical moments, he would take the PK, he would miss it. He would always step up. And when he broke the ice, he did it by chipping the keeper. And he never looked back.
Wow.
And it was a great moment for me to learn what that meant. And it was awesome to see his teammates celebrate with him when he hit it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that what's really important here is that what you were doing is you were choosing how you were going to build your culture. And I think one of the things that you have to have in an environment of trust where you're creating trust is that people have to have the freedom to make mistakes without the repercussions of feeling like they're a failure, right? And it's something that you have to be proactive about and decide in the beginning about your culture. How are we going to handle mistakes as a team? What are we going to do? Are we going to punish the guy who made the mistake? Because then they're not going to take risk anymore, right? That's what I hear you saying. It's like this player was an integral part, and you wanted to encourage that, hey, you're going to get past the mistake, that mistakes are part of the game. You're going to grow through the mistakes, right? I mean, you were creating a culture in how you were handling this whole situation.
Yeah, I think the reaction to mistakes is critical. The reaction to mistakes from everybody, from your teammates, from the staff, and I think it's born of the idea that you may have to lose something today to gain something tomorrow.
Yeah, right. It's a visionary approach, right? It's where you're going, not where you are. And you've got to learn to build those other aspects of your team and your players, or else you're never going to get to the place that you want to be. You're not going to be able to win the championship or whatever the big goal is that's happening.
Yeah, 100%. And I think one of the biggest takeaways to that kind of, I'll call it an experiment, was not from the coach or the staff. I think the biggest takeaway from this is the support that the teammates gave this player, because it would have been very easy for the teammates to start every time a PK was called and we put this player forward to take the PK. Oh, it would have been really easy for teammates' body language to, hands up in the air. What's coach doing? No, not this guy again, or somebody fighting him for the PK. But that wasn't the case. There was support from his teammates when he stepped up to make the PK. Mm-hmm. And when he finally when he finally made it and broke the ice, wow, that support really showed, because the celebration was fantastic.
Right. You know what? One of the things what you're doing is that these are the behaviors, right? It's like, well, how do we treat these kinds of situations? I think in the very beginning, to back up, for anyone who's like, okay, I want to create a high performance culture. I want to create a culture based on trust. So what do? I think one of the very first things you do, and I teach this constantly, right? It's the first step, is that if you want to create a culture, you have to know who you are and what you're going to stand for. And that starts with values, right? Your values are your voice. This is who you choose to show up as. As a team, our values, no matter what happens, okay, if there's a mistake, if we win, if we lose, it doesn't matter what goes on. These are our core values that we're going to live by no matter what happens, right? And I think that most teams, they don't have any idea what their values are. They might have some words on the wall that have been there for decades collecting dust, but it's not something that they're talking about on a regular basis. It's not something that they're rewarding players by living out this value, and they're bringing attention to the values of excellence or honor or teamwork or whatever it happens to be. And so if you're not clear about your values, I think that what happens is that space gets filled with all kinds typically of negative things, right? So, and you have no basis to reference anything. So if you're not clear about your values and somebody mistreats another player, then you can't say, hey, hang on a second, we don't treat each other that way, because we're a culture built, our values are trust and respect. But if you don't have those values, then you're not reinforcing anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. So where do you start with that, Tom? How do you, when you bring a group together, how do you begin with that?
So honestly, what I do is I have a whole bunch of words, right? They're cards, and they have all kinds of values on them. There's everything from what I've mentioned: excellence, honor, teamwork, integrity, all these words, all these value words. And what I'll do is I'll take the team through a whole experience where they take those words and they start to eliminate the words that aren't as important, and they focus on the words that are the most important to them, right? I do this both with individuals, because I think it's really important for people to know their own personal values, because your personal values, these are the core things that drive you. They're why you do what you do. They're why you are a coach. They're why you show up and do what you do every day. They're the 5 words that you want on your gravestone, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. Larry Sunderland, Tom Davis, they were men that lived for these things. And if you're not clear about those things, then what you start doing is you live a life that's more reactive than proactive. And what I mean by that is that you start just putting out fires, and you're all about the short term. How am I going to win this game? And how am I going to get this project done? How am I going to get through this? But you're not thinking about the why. And I firmly believe this is what separates the extraordinary athletes from just all the regular athletes, right? If you start to talk about to players who and coaches who really are at some of the most elite levels, and you start digging into who they are. I think of a Jurgen Klopp, right? Or a Pete Carroll, who coaches the Seattle Seahawks. You start to hear from these coaches that it's not about the what, it's about the why, and then the what comes later. So what I do is I have them go through this process of elimination, and here are words you like, and here are words that you care about, and you boil it down to, most of the time, between 3 to 7 core values of what your team is going to stand for no matter what. And then that defines everything. This is it. This is who we are. So, if you're talking whatever, if it's U.S. national team, right? You think about the values of the U.S. national team. All these kids come from all over the country, but when they show up and they put on that USA jersey, here's what our culture looks like. We're a culture of excellence. Here's what that means. We treat each other with dignity, honor, and respect. And you define it. This is what this looks like. This is when we make mistakes, we encourage each other. We spur each other on. We always believe, even in a game, no matter what happens, and we're behind, we always believe that we're going to come back and win this game. So the clearer you are about what these values look like, and the more you refer to them and you talk about them, the more the players, the more the team is going to embrace those values, and more importantly, live those values.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Tom. And that allows you in the end to be authentic.
I think because you know who you are, right? You know exactly what you care about and what matters. And so it doesn't matter the situation in life, that success or failure, this is how you're going to show up, right? You can't control the results many times. You can't control the outcomes of what's going to happen. We haven't been able to control all the stuff that's happening in this crisis, but what we can control is who we're going to show up being in triumph and tragedy. And that's where your values come from.
Builds that consistency.
Without a doubt. Yeah. Right. And so that's how you build a culture too, is so let's, you take a look at a Pete Carroll. And if any story about him, or you read his biography, he is a coach who is all about his values. He's boiled it down to 2 words. And those 2 words are always compete. And at first you would look at that, and I've never had the chance to meet Pete Carroll, but I've listened to a lot of interviews with him and listened to a lot of podcasts that he's done. And one of the things he talks about, he says, listen, when you hear always compete, he's like, I believe in excellence. So he has more values, but those 2 words define everything for him. And what he means is, obviously in his trainings, he always compete, and on the field, always compete. But also for him, what he really cares about is his family. And so he takes that always compete into being a husband and a father. Is he competing against all the other things that could vie for his attention, and make sure that he's becoming the best father that he could be, that he's becoming the best husband? He's competing against all the other things to be who he wants to be and what matters first. He says, you're either competing or you're not. Compete in everything you do. And he tells the Seahawks, his team, he says, you're a Seahawk 24/7. Finish strong, always have positive self-talk, team first. And they make cheers out of these things, right? And so this is really important to him. It's even written, these words are written over when you walk into the field house. And he's very, very clear about the importance of these things. And this is a book called Grit. I'm getting a couple of his quotes by Angela Duckworth. And he talks about, if you want to communicate effectively, you need to be clear about the words you use, right? So clarity for Pete Carroll is everything. And so, you look at him and think of all the success he had at USC, and he's one of the most winning college coaches. I remember watching those games with him. He's been very successful with the Seahawks, but you don't see what's underneath that success. And what's built underneath that success is this culture built on values. It's this culture built on knowing who we're going to be. And it's constantly reinforced, where they're always talking about it. They do cheers about it. I mean, this is the way that Pete Carroll inspires and builds a great team. So
it's always compete, right? And we were, a few minutes ago, we were talking about this idea of psychological safety. And I know Pete believes in that, and he works on that, right? And the idea of servant leadership for Pete as well, right?
Right.
It, but sometimes you hear psychological safety, and boy, psychological safety, maybe you think American football, and you using Pete's words, always compete. American football and psychological safety, you look at that sometimes and you go, they don't necessarily go together, but they do, don't they?
They do. And if you listen to what he talks about, it's very relationally driven, right? So again, back to, without safety, it's hard to have deep relationships, right? Because you're going to be yelling and screaming at each other every time you don't perform well. But it's not that way. I mean, he even talks about, like, because he's very much into winning, right?
Yeah.
But it's not just about winning. It's about doing your best at all times. And it's about reaching for your best, being all you can be, but being your best self. But he knows that you're not always going to do that, right? That just because they focus on finishing strong doesn't mean you're always going to be that way at every minute. And so then what happens is that then he reinforces that with these ideas of always believing in each other. And then when you don't do your best, and he's known for this too, is another chant: no whining, no complaining, no excuses. Right? Mm-hmm. And so it's always protect the team. So yeah, you can't really protect the team if you don't create an environment of safety that's built on values. You can't protect the team if you're all about me, right? Because then that's the shift from me to we, and that's what builds that. So again, I think that what we're saying is that you've got to compete, you've got to do your best, you've got to work hard, you got to train hard. But what starts to happen is that inevitably on a team, you're going to start to make mistakes, and you're going to lose games, and it's not going to be a perfect season. And if you have a healthy culture built on trust, what'll happen is the team will say, hey, that's okay, you're going to do better next time. Hey, let me help you. It's okay to make a mistake, take risk, all of this, and exactly. We're going to do this together. And if you don't have that, then the fingers start pointing, right? As you were describing in the negative experience you had. And it's not my fault. And what the heck is wrong with you? And you don't ever get this. And then it's going to implode, right? Because no one believes in each other. And then everyone just starts trying to protect themselves. And it just, survival mode at that point.
Yeah. And I think that's such a key point. The idea of trust allows for forgiveness, right? So if I screw up, right, and I don't score the PK, I know that my teammates forgive me. And I know that we're going to strive together to make this better, to fix this. But I have that freedom to, we're going to go back to that outside the comfort zone idea again. I have that freedom to go outside the comfort zone. I have that freedom to really explore excellence, knowing that I may fail, but I'm going to be forgiven and I'm going to go again.
Yeah. Now, so hang on. So you use another word there, that when I make a mistake, I know my teammates are going to forgive me. So is that important? Because I would say on the flip side, if I was playing devil's advocate, I would say, well, that's kind of a soft word too, asking for forgiveness. I mean, we all know we have to do this, right? To be healthy, because we're always doing things. Well, not always, but I mean, hopefully not as much as we did at other times. We learn and we get better. But there's things throughout life we're going to have to ask forgiveness for. But you're saying that in a team, it's important to create an environment where teammates are forgiving each other. Explain more of that to me, because I think it's a really important point.
I think if we talk about, in sports, we talk about make this play, prepare for the next play, right? Mm-hmm. If I don't complete this play, if I'm not successful in this action, immediate forgiveness allows me to go into the next action with trust, with belief, without fear, right? And I think that's critical. Now, the other thing, all right, so you may say that sounds a little soft, what, forgiveness? Well, the other thing trust does, and the other thing this psychological safety allows for, is strong confrontation, right? Because you can challenge one another in a strong way. I mean, I can tell you when we spoke about that team the positive culture we had on team. I can't tell you how many times I was called out, right, at halftime,
Right.
you know, and I won't use the words I was called out with at halftime, right? Because we're child friendly here. But I'm telling you, Tom, it was like, okay, I get the message, and you move on, and you work together to fix it. And I think this is what you want to have. You want to have this ability to immediately forget the last play and move on to the next play, and that forgiveness helps with that. But then you also want to have the ability to be called out.
Yeah.
Which, you know, at times we all need to be called out. You know, as a coach, you know, I'm talking with you about all these wonderful things. Well, I've been called out before when I haven't done these wonderful things. And to be honest with you, I appreciate those moments because it helped to refocus me, and it helped me to reflect on maybe when I wasn't doing it right.
Right. Well, yeah, so much rich content there in what you're saying. Yeah, because a lot of things, if you don't have an environment that is a forgiving environment, a lot of things leave. And what I mean is, players aren't going to take risk in an environment where they're going to be punished for making a mistake. Right. So now what am I going to do? I'm just going to play defensively, right? I'm not going to try to score the goal, because what if I fail? Then I'm going to get chewed out, yelled at, whatever. My teammates are going to start, you know, in on me. And so you lose that. But if you know your teammates are for you, and you know that they have confidence in you, even if you make a mistake, then now you're trying to make those extraordinary plays, right? You're trying to, you know, be creative and take the risk and make the sliding defensive tackle on the player that saves the goal, and all of these kinds of things. It creates a much different environment. And I think this is why all of these reasons you're giving are why trust-based teams outperform non-trust-based teams by 286%, right? So and I think it's the coach's job to clarify this too, right? To be clear that when we make a mistake, here's how we treat mistakes on this team. Right? Mm-hmm. Because if you don't, then again, nature hates a vacuum. It's going to fill it with something else. I mean, I've seen through some of my kids' teams, great teams, talented players, but the culture was just sour, right? And it might have even looked like the culture was great when they were winning, but as soon as they started losing, man, the coach lost it. The most negative players lost it. And then the coach would do things like, because this is a big part of it, right, is that when you're talking about creating safety and trust, it's how the leader uses the power that they have that creates that trust or removes that trust, right? Does that make sense? The leader sets the climate of the team. And so if you have a captain, for example, who's the meanest, most ego-driven kid on the team, in the middle of mistakes or a loss, that leader potentially can destroy the culture of that team. Mm-hmm. Do you agree?
Yeah, 100%. And just
I was hoping you would.
Yeah, something you just said, Tom. This is how we are going to treat mistakes. And I heard that, and I'm like, boy, I don't know that I've ever addressed it that clearly, that concisely with my players. Right? To actually to stand in front of the team and say, guys, this is part of our culture. This is how we will address mistakes. This is how we will address failures, right?
Right.
This is what we want to see. This is what's accepted in our culture. Bam, that's out there. And then anytime someone reacts opposite that, you are allowed, right? That's another big thing that I talk about, giving players permission. You are allowed to question it.
Right. Right. And if you don't clarify what that looks like, how are they supposed to know? Right. So and again, what you're saying is back to the other thing we were talking about, behavior that gets rewarded gets repeated. Mm-hmm. See, when you're clear and it's you're dead on, I think we've got to be clear about these things because they're so important in our teams, how we're going to handle these things in advance. Because when you are clear and it happens and you say, nope, this is how we're going to do it, you reinforce the truth of that behavior, right? The behavior gets rewarded, gets repeated. So I was talking to Steve Simonson, our good friend, who we're going to get on the podcast because he is just so brilliant in so many ways. But he was saying that on his team, that one of the things it's a cultural norm. They don't yell at each other for making a bad pass. They just don't do it.
Right.
And because of course he's trying to, he's being clear about these things, and he wants to create trust and safety. And he said it's so funny because they'll get a player from the outside, and that player will come in, maybe very talented, and someone will make a bad pass. He'll start yelling and screaming at the player making the bad pass. And all the team kind of turns to him like he's speaking a foreign language going, hey, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, what do you mean? What am I doing? I'm yelling at him. It's like, hang on a second. Do you think he did his best to get the ball to you? And so they reinforce the behavior. They go, on this team, we believe in each other. We believe everyone's trying to do their best. We got to improve, but we don't yell at anybody for making a bad pass. And I mean, it's just part of the culture, right? And so the same with mistakes, the same with the most important. I don't think that you need to have 15 of these things. I mean, no one can remember that. But on those core issues about how we handle mistakes and these kinds of things, I think you absolutely have to be clear on them.
Clarity, and then good examples of it. And I think we spoke about it. I don't know if it was last week or the week before even. Intentionally doing it, intentionally recognizing it, and intentionally showing gratitude for it. I think that's very important.
Right. And when you reinforce those kinds of behaviors, that's what builds your culture. I think too many people make the mistake of thinking that, well, you know what, we have a winning team or a winning history, or we're the best team in town, and so that's good enough for the culture. And it's not, right? It's not, because it's like, this is another idea in leadership. Either you build your life, or someone or something else will build it for you. Right? So either you be clear about what kind of life that you want to build, who you're going to be, what your values are, what your vision is, or else if you don't, that's not just going to stay empty space. That's going to get filled with a lot of things that you don't want, which is typically chaos, confusion, and underperformance. Right? So this is another Peter Drucker quote, that there's 3 things that you can guarantee always happen in organizations or teams. You can guarantee it: chaos, confusion, or underperformance. Everything else takes leadership, right? And the reason why Drucker was made famous for this quote is because this is true in any environment that you find yourself in. That if you aren't clear about who you're going to be, you're not clear about your values, you're not clear about what we're going to do when somebody makes a mistake for a bad pass, then what takes its place is chaos, confusion, and underperformance. And no coach that I know wants that. No athlete that I know wants that, right? And so before the mistake happens, or before the loss occurs, or before the team infighting starts, we have to back up and begin with the end in mind and decide, who are we going to be? What's this going to look like? And one of the things that you said, Larry, too, I thought was spot on, is that you mentioned about conflict. So there's another great leadership model by Patrick Lencioni, who many people may have read a lot of his books. He writes in kind of a story-driven format, really amazing. And he has an incredible book on teamwork. I think one of the best books I've ever read. And it's called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Mm-hmm. And have you ever read that book?
Yes.
Yeah, it's fantastic, right? I mean, you could read it on an airplane ride. But one of the things he talks about is, he says that what you have to have first and foremost, before anything else, it's foundational, is trust. Now, he calls it vulnerability-based trust. Okay, the New York Times award-winning author. He's published millions of books, done tons of research. Vulnerability-based trust. Now, there's another one of those words, right? Like psychological safety, which for him, vulnerability means you have to be real. Yep. So you have to ask for help. Like, so if I'm an athlete and I make a mistake, I have to ask for help. I don't know if you've ever had any environments where like players were asking for help from each other, and it's that dialogue of, hey, what could you have done differently, right? You're trying to make that experience happen better next time. But that's the first step, right? So, but then he talks about, and this is where what you were leaning into, is that the next level, once you build vulnerability-based trust, is that you have to have healthy conflict, right? But you can't have healthy conflict without trust. And healthy conflict, he says, that you should like argue, right? Sometimes, well, you should have done this and you should have done that. You're not yelling at them for making a bad pass. It's like, you need to make that play. And so what happens on teams is that now we can have a conflict like you described in that pro environment. and go at each other hard, right? And challenge each other to give more effort and push more and come on, I know you can do it, all these things. But even then, when you have that kind of conflict, you walk off the field and you're friends. You believe in each other.
Yeah, and it's so true. And I try to, that's also based in the idea that we're there serving one another. So with this trust and this idea of service, you can have this, let's call it healthy conflict, because you believe in your heart that you're having this conflict to make us all better. You're not having it out of animosity. You're not having it to hurt the other person. You're doing it to help the greater good, ultimately. So it's easy to have that conflict because you know it's based in the heart. It's based in what's best for the whole group.
Right. And I know that you're doing that if you are uplifting and living the values that we have that reinforces our culture as a team.
You know, and I have a clip, Tom, that I use with my teams. I'm not sure when it was, and I couldn't even tell you who the players are. It's a UCLA basketball team. And I love basketball, but I'm a basketball novice in a lot of ways. I can tell you this, and I'll try to paint the picture of the clip. It's a tall basketball player, which is not unusual. So maybe a center or a forward, I'm guessing, and a rather short basketball player for a basketball player, right? So I'm guessing maybe a guard, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And the clip is the two of them walking back onto the court. They had been off the court. They're walking back onto the court, and the tall player, his head is hanging down. His body language is really poor. And the shorter player comes next to him, and he has to reach up quite a bit. And he reaches up, and he puts his hand under the player's chin, the taller player's chin, and lifts his head up.
Yeah, I've seen this.
Have you seen that clip?
It's inspiring when you see it.
Oh, it's incredible. So I play it for all my teams, and I role play it. I ask them what's going through the minds of both of these players. What do you think had just happened as they're coming back on the court? And we talk about that, and we talk about all the things that are happening there and what we want to be. We want to be that picture for one another.
Yeah.
Right? And it's a wonderful illustration.
It is. I hope everybody's seen that. Yeah, and I've seen it kind of couched with this idea of a quote of, surround yourself with people who know who you are and not the mistake you make, or some different things like this. And that's what he was doing. He's saying, hold your head up. This is not who you are. Mistake is a part of life. And he was believing with him 100%. And that's what high performing teams do. Right.
Absolutely.
I think we could all look at if on one side of the coin, you had these dysfunctional teams, right? What you would find in those dysfunctional teams is a bunch of backbiting, yelling at each other, negativity, right? Egocentric. It's all about me. Now, and again, this is not that you shouldn't care and have pride about your personal performance, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about when everything is about me, right? That's what dysfunctional teams do. There's no trust, very little trust. Certainly, safety is hard to come by. Not a lot of healthy conflict. And really, as you can look at this as a journey where, okay, you want to move away from dysfunctional teams to a high performing team. What are the steps you need to make as you get there? And I think this is what we're talking about, right? It's the values. It's reinforcing who you're going to be, how you're going to behave when a mistake is made, and being clear about that. Another, I don't know if you heard or not, but one of the greatest coaches of all time died today. Don Shula, who was the coach of the Miami Dolphins. I think he was the most winning coach in the NFL. 347 games, 5 Super Bowls. And most of us know Don Shula and his great legacy. But I was looking, Larry, at I thought I'd look up what was his coaching philosophy. What did he believe? And he has an acronym he created based off of the word coach. And when I read this, I was like, now this is again, the same thing we're talking about. It's all about creating a high performing culture. And one of the things that the C stands for is conviction driven. Never compromise your beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what? You've got to be clear about what your beliefs are, right? That's what we've been saying. What are we going to believe?
Or the vacuum.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
What are we going to believe about each other? And it's a choice, right? It's a choice. What are we going to believe about each other when we make a mistake? Right? You have to be clear about your beliefs, and then just the H I thought was a real values driven, culture oriented one too, and it stands for honesty based. Walk your talk, right? And again, this is important. We're talking about who we are as leaders. Is that you better be a leader that does what you say you will do, right? This is the idea of walking your talk. And it's why it's so important that when you reinforce the values of your culture, you live the values, right? You don't compromise the values. And if the values get compromised, then you go back and you apologize. You say, hey, guys, we didn't reinforce this value. That was not right on our part. This is what should have happened. And you have to go back and reinforce those values. And so it's really important to say what we're going to stand for, who we're going to be, but also that we walk our talk. And I'm sure you've been around coaches who have done that really well and players who have done that really well. It's like you can count on this leader. You know what they're going to do. You know what to expect from them. And then when people have done the exact opposite of who they said they are and what they're going to do.
Yeah, and one of the things you just said, Tom, I love coaches, I love leaders who are not afraid to show their vulnerability and who are not afraid to step in front of the group and say, you know what, guys, I made a mistake, right? I'll take responsibility. I hope you forgive me. This is not who I am. This is not the person I want to model to you. And what I want to model is that I'm taking responsibility for my actions and I'm going to change and I need your help. Right. And you're not so above it all as a coach to feel that your players can help you too.
Yeah.
Right. And that idea of being vulnerable, I need to be vulnerable. I need to trust my players just like they need to trust one another.
I think they get more respect when they do that.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And yeah, like you said, we've all been around leaders that don't model that don't accept responsibility themselves.
Right. And it makes all the difference. I tell you, this has been a great conversation, Larry. And one of the things, everybody, that we're going to be doing on the as part of the podcast is providing you like a coaching sheet, right? How do you develop the things that we're talking about? How do you develop a team culture? And so if you would send an email, we're getting the website up and running. The website will be up, but we're still another week or so away from that. But if you want to send an email to me, which is tom@leaderselevate.com, tom@leaderselevate.com. Leaders Elevate is my company. If you would send an email, I'd be happy to get you a coaching sheet that's a PDF document that Larry and I put together that will help you walk through some of these things and to help you understand a little bit more about what a healthy culture looks like versus a dysfunctional culture, and some tips on what you need to start doing in order to get you there. But clarity is right in the beginning, and then establishing value. So I say the takeaways from what we've been talking about in this podcast is that number one, you have to build your culture. If you don't build your culture, then some other chaotic force is going to build it for you. I think you'd agree with that, right, Larry? You got to be clear about your culture. Number one. Number two, you got to create values. Who is your team? Your team is your values, and be clear about what they are and why you have them. And then constantly reinforce them, because behavior that gets rewarded gets repeated. And then Larry was given some great examples of how what about these issues that are going to come up. The third thing is you have to determine in advance how you're going to handle these hot issues. Mistakes, failures, asking for help, how you build trust, what it looks like for respect. You got to be clear. And then the fourth thing is you have to spend time reinforcing all of those things by giving them time, paying attention, coaching your values, coaching your players. If it's positive mindset you want them to have, then you've got to be constantly directing them towards positivity and teaching them how to have a positive mindset. Because all of those things build psychological safety that then creates trust and then helps you to have a healthy culture on your team. So, Larry, any other tips to leave our listeners with before we tell them some exciting news of what we've got for the next podcast?
Yeah, I think real quick, Tom, those 4 points that you just made, fantastic. And I would also add, make sure you witness them being linked to everything you do on the field with the players as well. Because a lot of this stuff you're going to build off the field, right? Mm-hmm. But make sure you link that to your game, to what's happening on the field, right? Because all of this has to be integrated. If we're talking about this psychological foundation to everything we do, then we need to link it. We need to link it somehow to the technical, the tactical, and the physical piece, right? So all of these ideas can be linked to what you're doing on the field as well.
Can you give me a quick example of what that might look like? So if you're talking about any of these issues, the mistakes or whatever, and you're training that in practice, how would you link that on the field?
Let's just make sure, for simple, right? If you've established how you want to deal with mistakes on the field, then let's make sure when you get on the field and you're actually training it, you're cognizant of that, and you're holding yourself accountable for that in your training, and that you're looking for that. You're looking for those moments on the field as well, when a player makes a mistake and another player helps him through it, right? Or you can witness forgiveness, right, on the field. Make sure that's happening on the field, and make sure you are recognizing it, right? And you are saying not just, oh, great play, right? And you're talking about a great soccer action or whatever you might be doing, but let's make sure you are recognizing and appreciating the reaction to that from other players, right? Yeah. Or from other staff members.
Fantastic. That's a great advice. Great advice. All right. So I understand we have an exciting guest coming on next week. Larry, you want to tell us who that is and give us a little detail?
Yeah, we're really, really fortunate to have someone coming on next week who really is a pioneer, right, in coaching. Carrie Taylor, who is an assistant coach at San Diego Loyal of the USL Championship League, works with Landon Donovan, where Landon Donovan is the head coach. Carrie is the only female coach in professional soccer in the United States. So she has broken the proverbial glass ceiling here in the U.S. She's been a head coach of men's collegiate soccer. And I know Carrie. I know, first off, she is a fantastic coach, fantastic person who just happens to be a female working in what is predominantly a male's game. So I think, or predominantly a male coaching game. Mm-hmm. I think she'll bring a lot of insights next week, a lot of insight into her mindset and some of the challenges that she's faced and how she's gotten through them, and how she continues to move forward in her coaching experience.
Wow, that sounds really exciting. I can't wait. She's got to have so many interesting stories and so many valuable things that she's learned along the way being a woman in a male-dominated sport. And you know what? We need that as men sometimes. That's the other half, our better half of us, right? We need those perspectives, and I'm sure that her experience is going to make an incredible podcast next week.
Well, I think she's going to be a wonderful first guest for us.
Yeah, sure will. Absolutely. Well, again, everyone, thank you so much. And I want to remind you that you can send me an email and we'll get some of these models out to you and some tips, some coaching tips for you as coaches. And then as an athlete, what you do to find your values and really know who you are so you find clarity. tom@leaderselevate.com is the email address. And Larry and I are also going to be putting together some material eventually to do some courses, because we really want to dive even deeper into this and teach how you actually do this and what does it look like to implement it. We're going to be able to walk you through those steps as we move along here. So again, thank you so much for tuning in. It has been so exciting to get to connect with you. And again, please, on the Heroic Mindset Facebook page, join that page. We'd love to interact with you inside that page. It's a fantastic group. And thank you for listening and subscribing. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button. We now have subscribers from 20 different countries, and we are incredibly thankful for that. So again, thanks so much, and we will see you next time on the Heroic Mindset Podcast.